In this video, we're gonna do a little bit of weaving, a little bit of needle felting, and maybe even some embroidery. So let's get started. Full disclosure, everyone, I'm a bit under the weather. You can probably hear it. And so I'm gonna try my best to keep my talking to a minimum so that I don't start coughing. I do have a nice hot cup of coffee here to get me through. I have double warped my mini frame loom with 4/8 cotton, and there's a total of 32 warp strings onto my loom. I'm going to be using this picture frame to frame this little piece. So that's where the size for this piece is coming from. And my little opening is 4 inches by 4 inches. So this is my inspiration for this piece. I want to do the background woven, some needle felting on top, and I think I want some of these really little details to be embroidered. So we're gonna try that as well. Now, what I do, this is Canva, by the way. What I like to do on Canva is keep this document going where I just save tons of different graphics, and I save things on there to use as inspiration for different weavings. I specifically like using Canva for this over Pinterest because I have the paid version of Canva, which means I have access to basically all the different graphics that they offer, and I'm allowed to use them. And so I like doing this over using graphics that I might find on Pinterest because I don't necessarily have permission to use those. So that's just what I do. But it's a really helpful tool, and Canva is decently affordable if you do a lot of this kind of stuff and like to create all kinds of different things. This is our mini recycled acrylic frame loom. You can find it at spruceandlinen.com. I'm gonna mention this a few times just because I still get a lot of questions about where my looms come from, where my tapestry needles come from, where my weaving combs come from. They are all from my shop, and these two things I actually make myself in my garage currently, and I'm really proud of these tools. You'll see them in almost all of our videos, and you can check those out at spruceandlinen.com. I chose to do a double warp for this one because I want to do that over one, under one twining stitch because my yarn is quite thin, and it's going to hold everything in place really well, especially considering that this piece is not going to have fringe because I want the piece to fit inside of this groove on my picture frame. So I'm going to go ahead and weave one row of over one, under one plain weave, followed by a twining stitch. If you need a tutorial for twining stitch, you can check that out right here. I forgot to put my cardstock in. So I'm going to pause and put my cardstock in. Now I want my piece to end up about 4 inches tall. So I'm thinking that this piece of cardstock would be about the right length. That should work out pretty good. This piece of cardstock, for your reference, is 2.5 inches tall, but this is all gonna depend on, like, if you're framing it as well, the frame opening that you're working with. For this, I'm actually gonna just weave this in over 2, under 2, because it really doesn't need to be over 1, under 1. And this is faster. Okay, I'm done my twining stitch. I've made sure that it's nice and tight around my warp strings so that it's gonna hold everything in place for me when I take it off the loom. So next, I'm gonna start weaving over 2, under 2. And basically what this is gonna do is it's gonna make all the warp strings kind of disappear, which is what I want. I want a really opaque backdrop. I don't want to really see the warp strings, so that's why I'm doing that. And I'm going to just keep doing that until I get to about 4 inches, and I'll end it off with another twining stitch. Now, one thing I will note for this one, I am going to be doing my best to make sure my edges are nice and tidy, but for this one, it actually doesn't matter that much because I'm putting that weaving so the edges are right here, and they're going to be covered up by this little rim that we're setting the piece in later. So just an FYI, if you are framing a piece and you have something like this, you don't necessarily have to spend as much time on making those edges perfect if they're not going to be showing. All right, I'm done weaving, so I'm just gonna flip this over and tuck in all the ends. Okay, friends, We're at the part now where we're gonna start needle felting. I'm actually gonna keep this piece of cardstock in the weaving just because I don't want things to, I don't think it will shift that much, but I'm just gonna leave it just in case. Here is my felting pad. So this is what a very well-used felting pad looks like. It's still definitely usable, but just in case you were curious, that's what it looks like. So I'm just gonna set my loom on top of this. Because this piece is so small, I'm gonna be able to just easily work right on top of this. I don't really need to prop up my loom. However, I could just add a book or something into the mix, but honestly, I don't think it's super necessary. All right, let's bring out the reference again. I am gonna be changing the colors from the reference, but this is what it looks like. And instead of using navy, I'm gonna use green. And then this more chartreuse kind of color, I'm gonna use this mustardy gold color. And then instead of this deeper reddish color, I'm gonna be using this lighter kind of pink, a little bit corally kind of color. I'm gonna start with the stems. So I have this scrap of green wool. I just grabbed it from one of my scrap bins. This is a color we have in our shop though, if you're interested. And I think I'll use a decently thick, maybe I'll make it a little less. Kind of want to use a thick-ish piece to start because this main stem is pretty thick and it does get really narrow once we've needle felted it. Now the other thing I'm gonna do, this end is really wispy, so I'm actually just gonna fold that over and I'm just gonna lay this out. And I might even just start, I wanna leave a little bit of room here. Just a tiny bit of needle felting. So this is a 3 needle felting tool. And truthfully, all needle felting is you have to use felting needles. They have burrs. It helps the wool tangle up into the weaving basically. And you just go in and out. Don't change angles when you're going in and out because it will break the needles. So I'm just gonna kind of lay this out and figure out where I want to end up. There's gonna be quite a big leaf over here. I want like a soft curve like they have. And then I wanna start coming back this direction. And I think the top is sort of in the middle. So we'll try to like bring this back up. And then I need room for that top flower. So you know what? I might actually just split this. And then I can use one end for this bit of the branch and the other for this. And maybe I could just fold it over and kind of needle felt it back into here. That might be too much. Let's pull some off. So I'm just trying to get the general layout at this point. And every once in a while, you'll see me pull this weaving up because it kind of gets needle felted onto the felting pad. So I just want to make sure I'm releasing that every once in a while. You can see the green coming through here already. Somewhere like that. So I kind of just realized I wanted this to go back this direction a little bit. So I just kind of pulled it up because it's not needle felted in very much yet. And I'm just gonna change that direction a little bit. So now all I'm doing is continuing to needle felt, and I'm gonna try to make this a little bit narrower now, this stem, because it started out pretty wide. So I wanna just shape that and narrow it down. I can switch to my single needle felting tool when I feel like I just want a little bit more control over the little details. Next, I'm gonna grab another piece of my green and I'm gonna start building out this stem here on the left. Okay, so I've got like the branch portion of this mostly in place. So I wanna move on to some of the other elements. I'm gonna be using this gold color for the leaves. So I just wanna grab a little chunk and I'll go ahead and fold that over. I might have to add more, but you can see that that's already kind of a leaf-like shape. And I'm just gonna start felting it into this. I wish there was more I could tell you other than I'm just kind of winging this, but So I've just kind of felted it in place. And then as I go, I'm gonna try to build that shape. You can see it's already kind of a leaf shape. See how it's already a leaf shape? You just work slowly, and the more you felt it, the more you can get that detailed shape in place. Okay, so every once in a while, I'm gonna grab my frame. And actually, my frame is kind of convenient because this piece comes out. So I'm actually gonna just take that piece out. And I can see that needle felting is actually causing this piece to narrow a bit. So that's one thing I didn't really take into account. I'm hoping that I can just sort of stretch it out, especially once I actually insert it. Let's just look at it this way. I think I'll be able to make it work. But you can kind of see what I'm aiming for here is to make sure that any of the details I'm adding aren't too close to the edges of the weaving so that you can actually see the whole thing through the frame. Okay, I'm working on the last leaf now, and I do have to say that leaves are kind of satisfying to needle felt. I'm finding that they're just sort of coming together pretty nicely. It helps that they're not too tiny as well, because it feels a little easier to get the shape. And anytime I'm trying to like put the wool in different places, so like here, if I feel like this is sticking out too much, I just angle my needle like this and go in and out like that, and it sort of like pushes it into place. So I'm never needle felting too much before I get my final shape in place. And again, you can see that like what I'm doing is not exactly the same as this. This is again just a reference, but I'm really liking that. Like I think it's working out quite well. I'm gonna have to figure out, this might have to move a little bit up based on where I put this leaf. I forgot to pull this up. Now it's really felted in. Whoops. You guys, this leaf is thick, like with a couple of C's at least. It's probably a little bit thicker than necessary, but that's okay. So now I'm using my single needle felting tool again, just to get those fine details like around the edges. You can see I'm trying to make this tip of this leaf a little bit narrower. So that tends to be a little bit easier with the single needle. I might have gone a little too far, honestly. But I think the nice thing about a leaf shape is it doesn't have to be perfect. Maybe that's why I like nature in my pieces so much, is that it doesn't have to be perfect. Sometimes it's nice to do something that is super, super precise and perfect, but I feel like most of the time I have a little bit more fun when it comes to needle felting, at least, when I'm not trying to make it perfect. Yeah, this leaf got a little thicker than necessary, but that's okay. So let's move on to the flowers. So I'm actually gonna do the flower shape and then do the little leaves around the flower after. So I'm just gonna grab a really small piece of my wool and just kind of, honestly, I'm just kind of balling it all up. There's no, there's no specifics here. And I'm just gonna start, again, I kind of start in the middle of the tuft of wool that I put on the piece and try to get it just started. And once it's sort of in place, I can start figuring out the shape of it. So I know that this one is sort of, it's almost gonna be like an oval, because those leaves are gonna cover up part of the flower. And I want this to go a little bit more this way. So I have that flower, I think mostly in place. I actually might add a little bit more wool right at the top. So I'm gonna do that now just because it got a little bit empty at the top. Now that I have that in place, I can grab more of my green and we're gonna make these little, how do I wanna do that? Now you can see there's quite a point right in here. So I want to make sure I try to create that because that'll give some separation between the two leaves. So something I just noticed, I definitely made my leaves kind of spread a little more than the picture, which isn't a huge deal because again, we're not striving for perfection here, but I do kind of want them to point up a little more. So I'm just trying to like manipulate them in place essentially. It will say it is definitely a lot more challenging once you get to these more small details. And as you'll hear me say over and over again, I'm always learning and always trying stuff. So that's kind of why I make sure that I'm not trying to strive for perfection because I'm like, I'm learning. And for me, I find that I learn best by just trying, and that's gonna mean not everything is gonna be as awesome as I want it to be all the time. And now I'm literally trying to pull some of this leaf up because I feel like it got away from me a little bit. Personally, I think that's the fun of it though, is obviously I wanna make really great pieces every time I sit down to make something. And I actually think this one will be, but it definitely helps going in with the attitude of like giving yourself some grace and not trying to be too perfect and not being so hard on yourself. Like I said, my favorite way to learn is just by doing things. Sometimes the learning is figuring out what not to do more than it's figuring out what to do. But it does help you kind of rule some things out so that the next time you have a better idea of what works better. I'm really hoping that the next few don't take me near as long because this felt like it took me so long. All right, I'm gonna move on to the next flowers, basically doing the same thing, but hopefully with a little bit more efficiency this time. I think I'm finally at the point where we can start trying to do some embroidery. Now I realize that embroidering through this felt is going to be a challenge. So I'm definitely gonna have to probably use a pretty thick or a pretty pointy needle to do it. Now, I have some embroidery thread and it is a little bit darker than the green I used here, but I think that's gonna be okay. I just thought it would be really interesting to add another element, sort of a different, like a third element. This is gonna be something that is a different texture than the wool. It's a different sheen than the wool. And I thought that might be kind of cool. And I don't know that I've done something quite like this before. And as I said, I love to just experiment with different things. So I'm gonna grab a decently long piece of this embroidery thread. I don't have the packaging for this anymore, so I don't know what color it is, but it was the closest color I had to the green that we're using. So I kind of want this to go down into here. I'm gonna leave a tail in the back, and then I'm gonna just make one small stitch. And now that I have that stitch in, I can bring this back in here and I'm just gonna knot this. And now I'm gonna be doing sort of, I don't know if it's called a back stitch or what it's called. So I'm going ahead of where my last stitch was, like so. And then I'm gonna go back into this hole again. And basically what I'm gonna do is stitch a stem onto the leaf. So I'm gonna do this middle line and then start doing some lines for the leaf veins. This cardstock is getting in my way, so I'm gonna remove that. So it's a little bit less annoying. Now, I think I could have probably used a more contrasting embroidery thread. It's a little bit on the dark side, So just keep that in mind when you're choosing your embroidery thread, that it might be a little better if it's more contrasted than what I have here. But I still really like it, and I think in person it does show up more than it is in camera or on camera, just because we have lights kind of hitting it in different ways. Now, while I'm deciding what I want to do with these flowers, I'm just going to keep going with the leaves. So I'm going to finish off this leaf and then figure out what I want to do with the flowers. And just in case you're curious, here's what the back looks like. So there's a lot going on, and that's completely fine. This is going to be in a frame, and I'm fine with the embroidery being a little messy. I mean, we've also got all this fuzziness from the needle felting, and that's fine by me. I finished the last leaf, so I'm gonna be done with this particular. Oh, see, when I put it in like here, you can't really see the string, but then if I like tip it up this way. So I'm just showing you that because in person, I can see these details so much better than when the light is shining a certain way on this. So I'm gonna just take this back here and tie it off, and then we'll figure out what to do with those flowers. I did actually, when I was doing the flowers, I realized that I was actually doing them not correct to my inspiration. I think part of the issue with this dark green embroidery thread is I think it was just not dark enough. So I'm actually wondering about using black, which the inspo photo had black in those parts. And then the other thing I think that would really help the detail, because this is like a fairly small area, is to use only half the thickness of the embroidery thread instead of the full thickness, because it was looking a little bulky to me. So I'm gonna just cut off a chunk, and then I'm gonna figure out where all these strands are. So there's 6 strands. So just carefully letting it sort of kind of spin. So now I have half the thickness, and I really think this is gonna kind of be the trick for making this look better. What I'm pretty sure I'm gonna need to do, just right off the bat, is actually just add another little layer of pink over top of this, because it's just looking a little untidy. So I'm thinking if I just add a thin layer of the pink back on top, that will get me back to sort of a fresh start. And again, that's something I really like about needle felting, is you can always add layers on top. Obviously, you don't want to get super, super thick, but in scenarios like this one, it's really not a big deal just to add another thin layer on top. You know, I could probably use a thinner needle now too, which would at least help me not mark up my felt as much. Yeah, see, this one is a lot smaller and thinner than this one. So let's try that. Already I'm liking that more. I think the thinner line was definitely necessary. It was just way too bulky before and maybe not enough contrast. I'm gonna keep making those lines, and I'll do the same thing on all of the flowers. So I have the detail done on one flower, and I do think it looks a lot better, but as you can probably tell by the sound of my voice, I'm not like super sold on it. But I'm honestly not sure what would make it better than this. So I think I'm gonna keep going, and maybe having them all match will kind of bring it all together. That's what I'm hoping for, so I'm gonna keep going. Okay, friends. I believe that it is done. Now, I do just, I kind of want to like clean up some of these green lines more. Like, I just wish they could be a little bit less fuzzy, but at the same time, it's like we're working with wool here. I'm not sure how crisp I can even get those lines, but I guess I can try a little. Needle felting is definitely one of those things that you can kind of like keep going and going and going. but I think I'm ready to call this finished. Now, it's a little bit smaller. I'm gonna try to, I think, stretch it out a little bit once it's off the loom. I'm a little bit nervous about that, but I'm hoping that it'll fit nicely because I do think this would be such a cute piece in this frame. So let's get this off the loom. I think what I wanna try to do, I want as much length as possible. So I'm actually gonna try to take this off the pegs, which is a little bit tricky, but it seems to be working, so that's good news. So what you can do is sort of grab some of the warp strings and pull them up toward the pegs, and then that helps make it a little bit easier to slip them off. So let's just look here. So it is a little bit shy, but I'm gonna just pull it and we'll see if we can stretch it out enough. Oh my gosh, it's so close. This is gonna be so sad if this doesn't quite fit. I think it literally just barely fits. So don't be like me, give yourself some extra width, but how freaking cute is that? I love it. So we just need to finish off the ends, and actually, do we need to finish them off? I'm gonna just see if it'll fit if I just sort of just like fold over the warp strings. It literally fits just right. This might actually be really quick to finish, which I'm looking forward to, because my thought process is if this is gonna live in a frame and there's a back on it, do I need the back to be any different than this? Probably not. If you were gonna look at the back, I would probably do it a little bit tidier, but I'm just gonna try to stretch this out a little bit more. So what happened is not only did the sides shrink in a little bit when I was weaving, but the biggest thing is when you needle felt, it kind of wants to like tighten everything in. So I think that's where I needed more width than I thought. So let's just measure it just so you guys have an awareness of how much it shrunk. So I was aiming for the 4 inches and I'm like just over 3.5. And 3.5 was like as narrow as it could possibly be to fit in this frame. If I could hot glue the corners, I can probably get it tight enough in here that it'll just stay. Okay, I'm gonna get my hot glue out and just try to do as minimal as possible. It does mean that this is like kind of the only way I could display this weaving, but that's okay because that's what I wanna do. Now I know most of you are never gonna have the same frame as I do, but I just wanted to explain what I'm doing and how I'm doing it just in case it's helpful. So since the top and bottom corners do basically reach the corners of my frame, what I'm gonna do is actually put the little bit of glue onto the wood itself and then kind of squish the weaving into it. Now my hope by doing that is that it won't spill over the edge. We'll see how it goes. I mean, it's wood, so I think I could easily kind of tear off the hot glue if that's necessary later. Okay, you guys, I legitimately feel like I got so lucky that this actually fits, and it almost doesn't, but I do think it's like good enough. I would have been really sad if it didn't fit. So I'm just gonna put that in there and then see how this covers all the mess up. So that's why I'm like, I'm not even gonna mess with it. Now this little frame is missing some of the nails to keep it closed. So for the purpose of this video, I am gonna tape this. And obviously there's better tape than like a painter's tape to do this, but that's what I've got. So let's tape this up and then we'll have a moment of truth. All right, it's all done. So let's have a look at the finished piece. I think it's official that my new favorite thing is framed pieces. So let me know if you feel the same in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed this video, check out this one next.